identity and integrity, and how those two come together. So very important. Because if how your life starts is love and truth, then the next logical question, like I said, would be, who are you? So that you don't have to go get a doctorate of psychology to understand yourself. Most people rebuild their lives from the outside in. New jobs, new goals, new habits. But if the inside's still cracked, it all collapses again. That's why at BHI, we focus on the basement, which comes after the foundation. If you have a foundation of love and truth, then the next logical step would be to observe what's in the basement. And the basement is identity and integrity, and how those two come together. So very important. Because if how your life starts is love and truth, then the next logical question, like I said, would be, who are you? And if you can answer who you are, then you can answer the next most important question, which is why you're here. Because if you know who you are, then you have a sense of knowing what to do. It's not concrete. It must be explored. It must be imagined. It must be created. The work still has to get put in. But if you know who you are in this world, then you will have a sense of what you need to do, and you can start heading into that direction. That's why we're in the basement. The part of the house where integrity is restored. Why do we put those two things together? Well, I'll tell you. Because integrity is when who you are matches your behavior. So you have no diversion from who you are and how you behave. When you have behavior matching your identity, that's what makes you a person with integrity. You're not lying. You're not moving in deception. You're not living a false reality. You're facing the truth. This is who I am, and this is how I act. Now, does that mean every single moment you're going to be acting, let's just say, as a world standard of good or correct? No. Integrity isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest. Because honesty is what brings clarity. If you can say, wow, if you're acting like an asshole, let's say, but internally you don't want to be that, then in that moment, by not having integrity, it's not serving you. Versus if you are an asshole, which I don't believe any person is an asshole really. I think they behave as one, but that is from not knowing who they are truly, and we'll get into that in a second, right? But outwardly, your behavior matches your perceived identity as asshole, then you would have integrity, but it's detrimental to you because that would be living in a false identity. I don't believe that there are people in the world that are exclusively evil. We have to look at the science. This is where empirical data and evidence, not just spiritually what the Bible says, but empirical data and evidence can ground us in the reality of ancient wisdom. So, biblical reference, right? Very important. Arguably, the Abrahamic texts are the most applicable pieces of wisdom that transcend time. The problem I find with most God-believing individuals or Christians or Jews, um, people who believe in the monotheistic God as I do, is that religion has a tendency to deny science. And that is why so many people all over the world have such trouble with accepting the notion of God, because we have an entire body of people who refuse to look at the science, the reality of how life works. And I've never been that person. I've disagreed with many pastors and rabbis and reverends and popes and all of your favorite religious titles. I've disagreed. To this day, I disagree with many of them. I would say probably 99% of quote unquote religious figures I disagree with, um, on various different levels. Some it's systemic, some it's I just can't stand the doctrine and the theology because it's just so far. And some it's, minor details. But certainly, if you're a quote unquote individual of faith that denies science, you have a fundamental issue with your theological doctrine, and that is a big problem. And you will never convince people who study, observe, and believe in the reality that is grounded in science to believe in God by denying science. And so it's just so counterintuitive. And honestly, the study of science has amplified my faith in God, as it were. I've had my own personal spiritual experiences that ground me and anchor me. Um, After I had those experiences is when I started to read the Bible. And then when I read the Bible, I started to experience spirituality on an entire different level. And when I started to, what I would say, enter into a relationship with God, um, anti religious, I can't stand religion. I mean, I've said it in many of my own videos because, again, what religion is someone trying to define God to you versus allowing God to define himself to you. Um, and so, yeah, big problem. But I don't want to rant on that for too long. It just the basis of all of my videos is always it's going to be theology and science. I think that bridges the gap. It um, and it's grounded in things that are true. And again, if you don't believe in God, then I hope at least the science of what I talk to you about is beneficial to you and it blesses your heart. And I think that entering into a relationship with God or being reconciled into a relationship with God, I would say, because we've all had connection with Him, I think, at various um, times in our life, whether we realized or not, and that is in the form of love and truth. Um, because I believe that in essence, God is love. And obviously, that is in Scripture as well. But that's because that's how I've experienced Him. When I attempted suicide 3 years ago, um, my life changed. My life changed completely for the better. And it was after my suicide attempt when I started to look at the world differently, when I started to look at the world through a lens of love and meaning, because obviously I survived and the math said that I shouldn't. Um, I understood I had worth, intrinsic value. Now, there are some of my brothers and sisters in the scientific community that are Darwinistic and obviously are very, very attached to the theory of evolution and natural selection. Um, I agree with parts of it, but if we're talking solely on a biological survival level, then certainly my life up until my suicide attempt was not really that valuable. Um, and so, if you go based solely on the science, then you don't have the aspect of love. And that's why in our foundation video, you'll see we explain love and truth together. And so, the next step after understanding love and truth and the needs for a human being to thrive, and this is what I'm talking about in all of my videos, everything is about thriving and not survival, truly living. Because to resort to our baser instincts and we're concentrate solely on survival in the 21st century is a miserable existence, to say the least. You would have to be very cold and calculated about everything you do, and your body will respond accordingly because life is more than just survival. Um, there is, I believe, fine tuned design to this universe, and it's about living. It's about becoming the person that you were born to be. And if you were to do that, then I think you would be experiencing heaven. That would be my definition of heaven is being exactly who you were meant to be 100% of the time. And that's how the Bible, in my opinion, describes having quote unquote God's will here on earth as it is in heaven. Because if you believe heaven to be the perfect place, it would mean that everyone is exactly who they are perfectly. There is no deviation, there is no deception, there is only truth. And if there is only truth, then the greatest proponent of that truth would be that God is love. And so, and that lines up kind of with scripture about how heaven is described: perfect love, perfect truth, no more death, no more darkness, as it were. Yes, they have the good and evil and all of those things, right? No evil. But yeah, I don't really believe that any one person is evil. I believe they are influenced by pain and trauma. And trauma, in the Greek sense of the word, is a wound. And when that wound is unresolved, then it begins to define who you are. And when you start to live life from the basis of trauma, and which is a survival response, right? Um, you can do some pretty heinous and horrendous things, and that's how the world would define as evil, evil people. But if you go look at the childhood of that person, and you would examine what happened to them, not just their current behavior, then there would be a pretty clear understanding of their quote unquote evilness. Um, every serial killer ever to exist in the world that we know of, that we make documentaries about, that we've arrested and stuck in jail for the remainder of their lives, came from super duper dark and abusive childhoods. Every serial womanizer, every man that has trouble committing to a woman, trauma in the childhood. Yeah, I mean, you could boil it all down. And it's not to excuse behavior. That's not what we're here to do. Because exposure is not about destruction. This isn't a gotcha. Exposure is about healing, because the first step to healing, as many of you know, they say that first step is acknowledging that you need to be healed, or awareness, because then you have a choice. And part of this channel is here to tell you that you have that choice to pursue becoming aware. And then once you're aware, you can make that decision. Do you want to utilize the awareness of your trauma to live from that trauma? Or do you want to use that awareness to clear the way for you to become who you were born to be, thus impacting the world in the most amazing way. Because that's what each and every single one of you can do. You are so unique, and you are so beautiful and amazing, and one person can change the world. It is 100% possible. We see figures in history that thousands of years ago did what they did and are still spoken about today. And so we definitely believe in one person being able to change the world. And if each and every single one of us were to pursue who we were meant to be, then the world would change. And so, just like last time, guys, I have our notes here on identity and integrity and all of the different things that pertain to those things. Because, like I said, the BHI, the Wholeness Framework, is a framework for living. And we believe that we've cornered and narrowed the market on what it would be to have a whole life. Now, that is one of the biblical terminologies for perfect is wholeness, to be complete. And so we definitely believe in that 100%. It's certainly paying dividends in my own life. And since I've started on this journey, life has only gotten better. And I believe that I was driven to suicide so that I could bring this message to the world. And I love you guys. I don't know you, but I love you. And so I want to talk to you about this. And so, identity integrity. Why is it so important? Let me get there. So there are several different anchors as to why these things are so important. I mean, and the core concept is, like I said, before you can build up, you must dig down. You must go inward. And so the basement in the building a home framework, which is identity and integrity, is where truth meets self. Very important. Where identity is formed and integrity is tested. Because, like I said in our flagship video, the Wholeness Framework, when we define truth, we mean it in two different ways. The objective truth of the world, what is definitively true, right? What is measurable, observable in the universe, right? And my truth. But we're not using the phrase my truth like some people out there, which are actually trying to say my opinion. No, my truth means what is true about you. And so when we combine science and theology, we believe fundamentally that your truth and love are found in the God of the universe, right? The most outward expression of that in a person would be in the person of Jesus. If you just analyze his life, how he spoke, how he thought, it would give you some great insight onto that. But now, what's most important is the love that you either received or lack thereof in your life, and the truth that you either received or lack thereof in your life. And then, of course, what's true about you. And if you're not honest about what's true about you, then you're not living in reality. It's a false reality. And so when you're living in the false reality, you get false outcomes. And when you live in false outcomes, you get despair. And when you live in despair, you no longer want to live. And so this is why we're here and what we do. So first things first, key definitions, okay? Identity, it's broken down into these things. In our framework, this is what identity means. Who you are at your core. Because if you believe in God, as I do, you were designed. Just like every fingerprint, I don't have a great camera, so it didn't focus on it, and we will be upgrading one of these days. Every fingerprint on Earth is unique 100%. There is not an identical fingerprint on the planet. Every single person is unique. The best thing that you can bring into the world is, guess what? You. Who you are. Who you were created to be. So, obviously, like I said, we are believers in God here, and that's sort of like a faith-based terminology. But if you believe in a designer of the universe, obviously we believe in a very specific interpretation of that. But if you believe that there is a designer of the universe, then by default you would believe you have a design, right? Because the universe is much more complex, right? And so if the universe has a design, fine tuning, they call it, right? Then inherently you would have a design. And so the core of who you are would be discovering that design, that journey of discovery, right? And it is 100% not tied to what you do. This is a huge problem in society nowadays, guys. Absolutely massive problem. Because now, especially in the West, it's global in this modern era. It's global, but I would say very much so in the West. Is that your value is determined by what you do, not who you are. So, for example, when we greet one another and I say, "Hey, how are you? My name is Thomas. What do you do?" That's like the standard modus operandi. One of the first questions. I mean, yeah, sometimes it's, "Oh, how are you?" Or, do you come here often? But one of the core principles of our conversation with one another is, what do you do? Now, I'm not saying it's not important. Certainly, purpose and vocation is important, but that comes later. Because here's what happens. If you retain your identity from what you do, what happens if what you do fails? What happens if you get fired? What happens if the opportunity is no longer present? What happens if there's someone that does it better than you? Then you die. If it dies, you die along with it. Why do I know this? Because I attached my worth to titles for years of my life. And one of the final bells that chimed, I guess, on my journey to suicide was that I had lost a title of service that I believed defined who I was as a person. Because in my mind, I said, if I don't do this, then what am I? Who am I? What do I do? What worth do I have? If I'm not this title, what worth do I have? And in the lies that I believe, propagated by my circumstances growing up, and all of the choices that I made up until that point, based on my trauma, and I'm not being a victim here, I'm acknowledging that I had been influenced by traumatic situations in my life, because as we discussed in the previous video, how brain development and your environment between the ages of, let's say, 0, it's not really 0, but from the moment you were born to about 12 years old, so very important. I mean, it extends beyond that, but those first 12 years, if you're not grounded in love and truth, like we said in the last video, then you don't even get the healthy opportunity to explore who you are. You can only start exploring and discovering and having an embarkation on the journey of identity if your foundation is love and truth. Because of what a human being requires. It's in the biology, right? And so that's one thing that we have to walk away from. Your identity is not what you do. Okay? It's the core of who you are. Where do we get that from? It's the Latin word. It's derived from the Latin identitas, which means the same being. The same being. So when God told Jeremiah, I saw you being formed in your mother's womb, I have etched the being of who you are since before you were born. Now, again, like I said, if you have atheistic tendencies, you're agnostic, it's fine. I get it. Regardless, we're going to go into the physiology, the psychology of not getting your worth from your production. Okay? Spiritually, right? Identity comes from God's voice, not the world's noise, because everyone is going to try to define you. Now, you could define yourself, but even within yourself, you're not perfect. So how do you know your self-identity, the identity that you have placed upon yourself, or that you are telling the world who you are? How do you know it's without flaw? Because unless you had a perfect life, which none of us did, even your self-identification carries baggage. And so fundamentally, you cannot even trust your self-identification. Right? And so that is why spiritually we believe in the design. God gave you an identity. And why does that track biblically? Because every time an individual in the Bible had an encounter with God, what was one of the first things that he did? He changed their name. Because it was transformational. Why? Because in biblical context, remember, even though the New Testament, the Gospels and the New Testament, right, were written in Greek, were delivered in Greek, it was with Eastern thinking. It wasn't with Hellenistic thinking. It was Middle Eastern thinking, Hebraic thought, Arabic thought, right? So with Middle Eastern context, when you name someone, that's why in cultures today they have naming ceremonies. It's not like here in the West where, oh, we picked the name because we thought it was cool and we slap it on the birth certificate. No. In Eastern, Middle Eastern and Eastern culture, even in culture in Africa, naming ceremony is so important. There is so much more thoughtful consideration that goes into the name of a person. Why? Because oftentimes your name is tied to your destiny. Who you are will play out what you do. So very, very important and food for thought there. So that's spiritual basis. Psychologically, though, identity forms from early attachment, belonging, and narrative. So your attachment styles that we've discussed in previous videos. If you were at anything but in a secure attachment, psychologically you were set up for failure, right? Environment. Because even loving parents that are doing their best have flaws. And that child experiences trauma. My best friend, he was the best man at my wedding, one of the most amazing human beings I've ever met. By his own admission, his childhood was, shall we say, 10,000 times less chaotic, detrimental, and damaging as mine. And yet, to this day, we can have contemplative conversations and feel the same way about certain things. How is that possible? If his belonging, if his early childhood was completely different than mine, his parents were never divorced, they stayed together, they've raised their entire family, he's a sibling, he's like one of four, I believe he's the eldest of four siblings, and And yet, and not in relative poverty. He did not experience crazy fluctuations in housing situation. He grew up in the same house with the same family, with the same living conditions and the same finances, and yet he still has some psychological damage that is almost the same as mine. Eh, How does that manifest? Because even the most loving parents are not perfect. And so, in that imperfection between the ages of infancy, let's say 1 day to 12 years old, whatever happened within those first 12 years develops those traits. It's just the science. It just is what it is. The brain, the nervous system, the soul, the mind require certain things for healthy development. Now, was his development healthier than mine? Maybe, sure. Um, are other people's developments around you maybe healthier than yours? Maybe, sure. Regardless, though, it's the recognition that work needs to be done and awareness that brings that healing from that, right? So, early attachment, belonging, and narrative in your childhood years, so very important. And integrity is the alignment between your inner truth and your outer behavior, like I said earlier. From the Latin integer, which is whole or complete. So who you are matches what you do, right? And integrity, like I said, it's not perfection, it's internal consistency. Because even if you know who you are fully and completely, you still have to act that out. You still have to be who you are on a daily basis till the day you die. And it's not always going to happen. But the more you hit the mark, the better you can be. And the better you can be, the more you can change your world. So when identity, who you are, aligns with integrity, how you live, your basement is solid. There's no mold. It's not disorganized. It's beautiful down there. It has utility. Just like the basement, a good basement of every home that has a basement is not disorganized. It has utility, and in the best case scenario is designed beautifully. Okay? So when they diverge, which a divergence means you're living a lie. You're not being who you are really. You're pretending for whatever reason, survival response, trauma response, or you're just ignorant. You don't even know who you are. I didn't know who I was for the first 28 years of my life. Yeah. For the first 28 years of my life, or 29, for the first 29 years of my life, I didn't know who I was. I didn't even think to pursue that question. Right? And so that's when the foundation starts to crack. So, psychological grounding. I'm sure many of you heard of attachment theory. Attachment theory, very, very prominently explained by Dr. John Bowlby and Dr. Mary Ainsworth. So, a child's sense of safety and belonging, right? Secure versus insecure attachment profoundly shapes identity formation. Okay? If love feels inconsistent or conditional, the child internalizes false identities. I am not enough. I am unlovable. I am broken. Okay? Because a child's mind and brain doesn't have the capacity to understand uh, context. Okay? So they only make internal conclusions. Okay? Which is a nervous, because that part of the brain to discern and to cipher what's true from not is still in development. So even if you would want to know what's true, you couldn't, because your brain literally has not developed to the point of discernment yet. And so early on, very much so, your identity is formed by your parents and your environment. And then once you have that baseline, which the identity the baseline of identity is you are enough no matter what you do, and you're unconditionally loved. If that's not the baseline, you will never be able to explore, go on that journey of discovery to the next step, because there will always be a deficiency. There, you will always be pulled back, even if you make that attempt to leap out, shoot for the moon, and if you miss, land among the stars. No, you will be that gravitational force will pull you back down to earth, and there will always be that echoing of those two things. Of those three things. I am broken. I am not enough. I am not loved. And that's just in the science. So what happens is these eternal lies often become adult patterns, okay, of addiction, people pleasing, or performance driven living. Okay? I had all three. I was an addict from the age of 11 to 20. Okay? The first time I snuck a cigarette, I was 11 years old. The first time I smoked weed, I was 13 years old. Then I was addicted to cigarettes, and I loved pot. Like, loved it. And we're not, even the brain development at 13 smoking pot. The science behind it is insane. It blunted me for sure. If I sound smart now, I would have been even smarter. Okay? So my potential was blunted because I was inhaling substance, performing substance abuse, still while growing. Very big problem. Then there's another very, very, very important study by Erik Erikson. He calls it Stages of Psychosocial Development. Okay? Because ideally, if you have love and truth, then identity and integrity can start forming once love and truth. So after age 12, when that early childhood development ideally means you have secure attachment, you're unconditionally loved. Okay? So from ages 12 to 18 is where psychosocial development happens. So you have your identity versus role confusion. Okay? Which is the pivotal stage for self-definition. Okay? So if you go into those years of your life without that solid foundation, and then you will then be defined by others versus you being able to bring your definition to others. Make sense? So without truthful mentorship or belonging, confusion leads to fractured identity. That's why when males hit that puberty age, they require that male presence in their life. And ideally, that male that is present is healthy or on the path to being healthy, so that you can learn the idiosyncrasies and the patterns and that stability to help guide you into becoming who you are, right? And ideally done in community. I mean, now we've almost shattered community. If you look at indigenous study of the family, how family used to work, when they say, oh, it takes a village to raise a child, they weren't lying. That's not just a funny phrase. It's neurobiology, neuroscience coming into play. Because when you have multiple adult figures in your life propelling you to become the best version of yourself, wow, how much successful you could be as a person. You have Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, one of the leading trauma specialists of our age. He wrote a wonderful book called The Body Keeps the Score. Because what happens is trauma is not just a memory, it's stored in your physiology. So when your identity is threatened or integrity is compromised, the nervous system reacts as if it's under physical attack. Okay? Adrenaline and cortisol, those are the stress hormones. Why does that happen? In the short term, and talking biological science, right? Those stress hormones are in response to external stimulus, right? So if I was in the jungle, 30,000 years ago, my body would dump adrenaline and cortisol if I were observing a jaguar in the distance stalking me. So what would happen? I would be able to think faster and I would be able to run faster. And I would have increased strength in my body. And I would have decreased perception of pain. So all the things that I would need to either outrun the jaguar, outsmart the jaguar, or kill the jaguar. Right? So now what happens? We're in modern society. We live in cities. We're no longer one with nature, as it were. So, but the body is still the same. The design of the human being is still the same. So where do we get that perceived existential crisis from? Is when who you are and what you do, your identity and your integrity is compromised. So that same dump of stress hormones that you got from the jaguar 30,000 years ago is that same dump that you experience as a child or as a developing adult, young adult. And here's what happens. When stress hormones stay in your body for far too long, you start to die. In the short term, survival. In the long term, death. Blood pressure, hypertension, stress on the nervous system. When they say stress kills, it's, again, not just a funny phrase. I mean, I could list all of the symptoms. When you maintain those stress hormones continuously on a daily basis for years on end, you start to die slowly. So healing requires safety, truth-telling. So that means you need to be able to speak who you are to someone. What's true about me? Right? I was sexually abused by a family member when I was 3 years old. Okay? And I was embarrassed and filled with shame. And it affected me profoundly. After that, I experienced the divorce of my parents at 8 years old, and I had a very abusive biological father. But until I could start speaking about these things, so find your person. And if you have no one, talk to us. We have a Discord. Tell us. Or write it in the comments if you're so inclined or bold enough, because you have to let it out. You can't hold it in anymore. It has to come out for the nervous system to equalize and stabilize. Okay? Because that's what healing requires: safety, truth-telling, and embodied integrity. Because then finally you said it out loud. That was your first step, your first action to finally reveal who you are, what's going on inside. Because underneath all the trauma is the good things. Buried deep down is the design that God had for you in your life, the person you are meant to become. But all the trauma is layered on top of it. So until you look at the trauma and you start dealing with it, you can't get to your identity, who you are. The spiritual foundation. Jamie Winship. Okay? In my opinion, one of the most prolific authors of our time. If you're a theologian, right, or a person who believes in God, this is one of the most theologically sound books to have ever been written. If you're a person who doesn't believe in God, it's still a great book because it goes into the identity exchange. Why? Because fear drives false identity. And love reveals true identity. If you're acting in fear, if your motivation is fear, you're living in the false. If you're acting in love and your motivation is love, then you're living in what's true. Okay? So every false identity is rooted in fear. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of abandonment. The identity exchange in the book, and he has lots of videos on it online, is the process of confessing those false identities to God. That's real confession. Confession is, not, Father, forgive me, it's been 5 days since I've confessed. Yes, my child, tell me your sins. No. True confession is finally being truthful about what you're afraid of. That's the confession, the most important one. What are you afraid of? Because the moment you declare your fear, you take away its power. And the more you go through that process, so you visualize, tell God, my greatest fear, I'll tell you guys my greatest fear. My greatest fear is living a lie. Okay? And I'm not actually afraid of being wrong, believing a lie or living a lie. I'm afraid of building something beautiful on false ground. Because I'd rather face collapse than live in illusion. So the foundational principle of my whole psyche is truth or death. It's my only two options. That's my psyche, is truth or death. And so I'd rather die than live in false reality. Okay? And that's just me. Whatever your greatest fear is, though, you confess those false identities to God. And you're asking, who do you say I am? So you're not, so when I did that, I said, God, I feel I'm a reject. I'm afraid of living a lie. I'm broken. I'm unloved. I'm a reject. I'm completely rejected. He said, no. And he told me my name, Excavator of Hearts. So, because the answer will always align with God's character. So, like I said, not the religious God, but the God that I know, the one that is the universal force of love in this universe. His character is truthful, freeing, and loving. That's who you are. Okay? So when you confess your fear, I'm not enough, and ask God for the truth, he replaces it with, you are his son, daughter, and he will give you your name. I truly believe that. And this is not a paid promotion. I own the book, and it changed my life. So definitely a great read. Go read that. But now neuroscience and integration. Oh, we're getting on 50 minutes here. Go. Neuroscience and integration. So Dr. Daniel Siegel, he has a work known as Mindsight. Okay, very important. So he says, integration is the pathway to health. The brain thrives when left and right hemispheres, logic and emotion, communicate in truth. So integrity, literally, when you act out who you are, so when who you are matches what you do and what you do matches who you are, integrity literally rewires neural pathways towards wholeness. Another great individual, Dr. Lisa Miller, wrote The Awakened Brain. Okay? And what she talks about is a spiritual connection reduces depressive symptoms and increases resilience by 80%. They did a study of people who have faith and people who don't have faith. So that spiritual connection, the connection that you feel like you're connected with God, on a baseline from the science, those people are less depressed and they have greater resilience. So resilience, your capacity to endure suffering and come out the other side a better person. That's resilience in a nutshell. Your capacity to suffer and utilize that suffering to bring you up versus keep you down. Okay? So knowing who you are in connection to something higher activates the brain's empathy and motivation networks. So you're able to empathize with other human beings and be emotionally aware, and you're super motivated. Because why do most people lack motivation, lack direction? They don't know who they are, they don't know why they're here. One of our older videos, we explained that is one of the main two questions that we aim to be able to provide to people in our channel is who are you and why you're here. Because without those two things, life is not worth living. You might as well, it's just, unless you know who you are and why you're not here, you will be suffering a lot. And we don't want anyone to go through that suffering. It's not worth it. I suffered through it. And it got me to rock bottom. And I attempted to take my own life because I didn't have an answer to those two questions. Which, if you really care about living life and the abundance of life and all of its living, then that should be your pursuit. And if that's your pursuit, and the thing is, when you seek, you will find it. So it's not that hard, and it's not that far. You just have to be willing to show up and do the work. So another great reason for this. So the neuroscience and integration. So another great man, Dr. Andrew Huberman. He's blowing up all over YouTube. We've talked about him before on the channel. But he talks about truth and neuroplasticity. Okay, because when he was at Stanford, he did a lot of his work was on truth telling. And so what he says is when you confess truth out loud, you engage the prefrontal cortex, which is here. That's your rational thought. And you deactivate the amygdala, which is your fear response. And so telling the truth literally calms the brain. So your amygdala shrinks and your prefrontal cortex gets bigger. Fear has less power over you. So telling the truth literally calms your brain. And if the truth right now is, I don't know who I am, I don't know why I'm here, great. That's step one. Okay? Now, application. Because we always want to give you guys something that you can do. Okay? It's not but again, the information is useful to me, and so far so good. People have stated it's been useful to them. So that is why I bring all these things in this way, so that you don't have to go get a doctorate of psychology to understand yourself. It's all out there. We live in this age of information, and I want you guys to be benefiting from this as much as has benefited myself. Okay? So here's the application. How to build your basement. Number one, like I said earlier, confess the false. Write down every lie you've ever believed about yourself. This is the second best book that's ever been written. Okay? This is my journal. Okay? My journal. Okay? One of them. I go through journals like nobody's business now. I used to judge people that journaled, but now I realize it's like one of the most useful tools. Because when you take thought, you turn it into reality. It becomes a reality once you write it down. It has physically manifested. The thought has physically manifested itself when you write it down on paper. You're able to analyze it in a way that's different than just ruminating up here all the damn time. Okay? When it's all in the brain all the damn time and in the mind, it's really hard to control the traffic in here. Okay? So when you write it down, The thought then manifests itself physically. It's written down, and you can look at it. You can make that observation. You can say, wow, that is actually really crazy, or that is actually really true, or that is actually really beautiful. Because the thought, you can perceive the thought as beautiful, but then when you write it down, it etches into memory. It becomes a part of your physiology. Your nervous system picks it up as, hey, this is something that needed to be written. It was worth more than just a thought floating around in your brain, okay, in your mind. So write down every lie you've believed about yourself and then say them out loud. I know this is ridiculous, but if you gotten to the point of desperation like I did, then you'll be willing to try anything, okay? So you bring them to light when you say it out loud. So you're writing it down and you're saying it out loud. You're bringing the spiritual and the physical together. Because we could go into vibration and frequency and all these things, the study of symmetology and how it affects the body and how we're mostly water and what sound, and how water interacts with sound, and it's amazing things, guys. Then ask for truth, whether through prayer, reflection, or counsel. Ask, who am I really? So here's what I want you to do. If you believe in God, have that conversation with God. If you don't believe in God, here's what I want you to do. Close your eyes. Imagine that the universal force of love is in the room with you. Okay? When you ask love that question, what is the response you get? Okay? And if it's still negative feedback, then it's because you just have a lot of trauma, you have a lot of damage, and you can revisit that conversation multiple times. It's not a one and done. This is continuous work. Okay? And then you replace each lie with a truth. And then, number 3, live consistently. Begin making small daily choices aligned with your new identity. And it will be intuitive to you. And it will make sense. It will make so much sense. Because when I received my identity, excavator of hearts, I understood, wow. Because it stems from that inner child, that person you were created to be. Growing up, I wanted to be a paleontologist. I wanted to dig up bones and reveal the mysteries of the universe through dinosaurs. But that's what happens when you're a child. Your childlike brain, your childlike spirit, it perceives identity with a job title. And it's not actually the job title within itself, it's the attributes. You're looking at the attributes of that thing. So what does a paleontologist do? A paleontologist digs. It digs up things that are ancient and old, and it uncovers them and brings them to the light for the benefit of mankind. That's what a paleontologist does. A paleontologist has a tremendous sense of adventure and is a truth seeker, wanting to understand where dinosaurs fall into the history of this universe. And what do most paleontologists do? They publish their work. So now, as an adult, I couldn't become a paleontologist, right? But I'm an excavator of hearts, so I want to dig up all your old bones, starting with mine, bring them into the light, and I want to publish the work for the betterment of mankind. I want you to become who you are meant to be, because if who you are meant to be, and you're walking in that integrity every single day, I know you'll change the world. I know it. And I'm on my way. We're starting with global impact and going forward from there. We're not shooting for anything less. Because if it can happen with one, it can happen to many. Okay? So example, if the truth is I am loved, then live as someone who is. Okay? Behavior. Because if you knew you were loved, you would be making decisions very, very differently than you are right now. You wouldn't be afraid. You would be courageous. You would be bold. You would be going through that next phase of your life inspired and excited. Oh, man. And then seek accountability. Why? Because integrity requires witnesses. People who can call you out when you drift. I have a very small circle because my trust in other human beings with the core of who I am, not that broad, right? But there are people in my life right now that they know when I'm not acting in who I am, they have the capacity to call me out. Okay? Find that person. Or if you already have that person, great. And if you don't have that person, you have us. Like I said, we're here for you guys. We love you guys so much. We want you to have this type of amazing life. Okay? Even if you have no one right now that no one in your life could possibly understand, we understand. I say we, Building a Home Framework, Building a Home Incorporated, our company, my wife and I, we understand what it's like. So send us a message. We would love to discuss with you. We would love to walk you through these things so that you have some accountability in your life. And then the last thing is integrate emotionally and physically. So journal. Move your body, whatever that is. Eat well. Because if you believed you were loved, you wouldn't put junk into your body. I ate like garbage my entire life. I'm still recovering from all of that trauma of eating garbage my entire life. For the first time in my life, the last, I would say, year, I've worked on eating healthier and healthier and healthier. And specifically starting this year, like as of August, my wife and I have been eating super clean and on a budget. Not, we do our best to get the best ingredients we can on our budget. We don't overexpand and go crazy. We do the best we can with what we have. But no more fast food, no more soda, none of that stuff. Because now knowing that I'm loved, I want my body to reflect that love, which is health. Okay? So all of these things, guys, just want you to know that your basement is not the place of shame. Okay? It's the beginning of freedom. Because you can't build wholeness on pretending. Just have to, what do the kids say? Keep it 100. Keep it a buck. Get real. Get real with yourself so that you can get real with the world that's around you. Okay? You can do this. This is possible. You don't have to live in shame, fear, and guilt anymore. You don't have to believe that lie. You can become whole and live differently. This has been Thomas Emmanuel Orms O'Brien. Love you guys. See you on the next one.